Hey guys, Captain Todd here from Dana Wharf Whale Watching and the Gray Whale Foundation, and I'm here to celebrate the 2021 Festival of Whales. As you may know, normally I would do a seminar at Harpoon Henry's in celebration of this event. Today I'm doing a virtual video so that you guys can see a little bit about what to expect out here on the water and we can still practice social distancing. So let's get started. Today we're actually going to be talking about the gray whale. This is our focal animal during the Festival of Whales, even though there's an opportunity to see other whales like humpback whales, fin whales, minke whales, and a variety of different dolphins. It's the gray whale that's been our focal animal for years. This exceptional animal is going to be migrating from the Bering Sea down to the bays and lagoons of Baja and then back up to those feeding grounds, making passage right here in front of Dana Point. We're actually one of the best destinations in Southern California to go whale watching. In fact, we're the most historic area to whale watch in the United States. This animal here, staying in close proximity to the coastline, gives us a great opportunity to see this animal out in the wild. Now, each year the California gray whale evacuates from the waters of the Bering and the Chukchi Sea up in the Arctic and heads down to the bays and lagoons of Baja. Now, the migration is a necessity because the animals cannot stay in the feeding grounds, and it's too dangerous to stay in grounds south because of predators like orcas and inclement weather, where we would have storms all winter long and make it very difficult for calves to survive. So these animals have chosen the lagoons of Baja to be their calving and mating grounds during the winter months. So in preparation for this long migration in which they'll be fasting, the animals will feed continuously 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the entire summer in the Chukchi and the Bering Sea, feeding on amphipods and crustaceans. Now, even though there is a little bit of krill consumed by gray whales, they're not really big krill eaters, and that's because of the size of their mouth. This animal here has a very narrow jaw and very few ventral grooves. Whereas if we look at the humpback whale, we can see that the humpback whale has a very wide and V-shaped jaw and then has multiple ventral grooves going from the chin all the way to the navel, allowing the animal to have a larger amount of expansion in the mouth, which means more water can come in the mouth, which means it's better adapted at feeding in the upper middle water column on krill and finfish or squid than the gray whale. Even though the gray whale can feed on things like mysids and krill, snapping shrimp, it prefers to feed on amphipods and crustaceans, which are found in the sediment at the bottom of the ocean. So just like our gardens at home, rich soil means that the soil will have worms, roly-poly, spiders, and snails in it. And in the rich sediment of our oceans, we have a similar thing going on. We have all these nutrients that live in our sediment as digestives. And they might look a little bit different, but they're basically the worms, the spiders, the snails, and the roly-polies of the ocean. And that's what the gray whale consumes. So gray whales actually feed by going down to the bottom of the ocean, laying on their sides, literally on the bottom, slightly opening their mouth, and then waving their tongue back and forth. They can loosen the sediment, create suction, and start siphoning those nutrients out of the sediment for consumption. The gray whale will consume 1,000 pounds or more throughout the summer months each day. So 1,000 pounds or more a day of nutrients consumed, and this will allow the animal to stack on the fat needed to survive this long migration, which covers about 7,000 miles one way. So we're talking, up to 14,000 miles round trip. If they go all the way to the Arctic. Most of them are about 10 to 12,000 miles round trip. And yet, it still is the longest migration of any mammal on our planet. Now, the animal doesn't just take a straight line from the Bering Sea to the bays, lagoons, and back. It actually follows our whole coast and the contours of it. For their protection, they like to stay shallow. This gets them away from the elements as well as predators. And that adds about 3,500 miles to their migration. So like I said before, gray whales actually fast while they're migrating. We know that their digestive systems pretty much shut down as adults when they migrate and kick back on when they get closer to the feeding grounds where they'll start consuming the nutrients again. Now our juveniles, we note that those juveniles they have a much higher metabolism, so juveniles do feed along the migration. help support the weight that they need and the energy that they need. But the adults are capable of living off their fatty lipids and pretty much going through the entire migration without much feeding, if any feeding at all. And so that means that gray whales are going to have a considerable amount of weight loss during these 6 to 7 months that they migrate. In fact, gray whale is going to lose about 1,000 pounds a week if it's an adult female, giving it a total weight loss of about 30,000 pounds by the time it reaches the Bering Sea and starts feeding again. And that's incredible when you consider that some of these adult females are going to be nursing, they're going to be calving, they're going to have a baby with them, and yet they're still going to be capable of producing about 50 gallons of fatty milk every day to their calves. So when we think of that, it's just incredible how this animal survives. Now each year, the third week of September to the first or second week of October, these animals all start evacuating from the Bering Sea. It's impossible for this animal to stay in the feeding grounds, as these plates of ice will start forming, making it impossible for this air-breathing animal to get to the surface and breathe. So the animal has to evacuate, head south to the bays and lagoons for the winter, and then back up to the feeding grounds for the summer. Now, a unique thing about the gray whale is that it has to conserve energy now. In order to be able to fast 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 miles one way, and then make it all the way back without being emaciated, the animal has to have a certain amount of economics, if you would, in order to be able to travel without losing too much weight. So when a gray whale travels, it travels at about 4 miles an hour. And it's also capable of regulating its heart rate. So when the animal departs from the Bering Sea, it's going to have this pace that it takes. It's going to take this coastal migration. It's going to be swimming about 4, maybe 5 miles an hour. It's going to give it about 100 miles every 24 hours of travel. And what's really cool is the animal can actually regulate its heart rate. As the animal makes dives as it swims, it can use atmospheric pressure to help slow the heart rate down. So as the animal travels, when we watch gray whales, we see them up on the surface taking 3 or 4 breaths, and at that time that's an exercising heart rate, and the heart will be beating about 40 beats per minute. And then if you guys know, if you've watched gray whales, they'll disappear for about 3 or 4 minutes, and at that time they don't just swim straight down and straight back up and keep going. They're actually swimming at diagonals using gravity and buoyancy to travel. So when the animal takes a dive, this enormous animal, even though very buoyant, does feel the effects of gravity. It'll give a couple kicks of its tail and start to descend towards its destination at a diagonal. Now as it gets to a certain depth, it'll then give a couple more kicks of its tail, not using much energy at all, and start to come back to the surface using buoyancy. And during that dive, the animal will actually lower its heart rate to about 10 beats per minute. So that allows the animal to really conserve energy. You could actually say that while gray whales are traveling, they're almost hibernating. They're capable of sleeping. Our marine mammals like dolphins and whales shut one eye, and that triggers the opposite hemisphere of the brain to shut down and recharge. So we know that these animals are probably sleeping a lot as they travel. They're lowering their heart rate, and they're using gravity and buoyancy to help them travel up and down the coastline, making them very economical with the fatty lipids that they're surviving off of. So these animals will get down to the bays and lagoons. The general population will be there mating, and the mothers will be nursing or calving. Now, when the whales evacuate from the Bering Sea, the female population that's not gestating or has a calf with them will start to ovulate. They're going to have their first ovulation in the latter part of October. So it's very likely that females are going to already have males courting them very rapidly on the south migration. And about 50 to 53% of them, we know from studies, are going to conceive at that time. Now, gray whales have a 12-month gestation period. So the following year, upon evacuation, the gray whales that conceived in October are going to be giving birth north of Los Angeles and not actually in the lagoons. We do see a lot of southbound gray whales escorting their calves to the lagoons. However, we all know the lagoons as the mating and calving grounds of the gray whale. This is where it comes into play. If the female doesn't conceive in that first ovulation, a couple months later, she's going to ovulate again. She'll be in the lagoons. There's a lot of mating going on in the lagoons. Once the female gets to the lagoons, if she hasn't conceived, she's gonna be mating there. And with the 12-month gestation period, she's going to make it all the way back to the feeding grounds and all the way back to the lagoons before she gives birth, hence the mating and calving grounds. Excuse me. Now, gray whale calves are born about 12 to 15 feet long. Excuse me. They weigh about 1,200 to 1,500 pounds, and they're going to be growing rapidly. As I said before, this mom who's losing upwards of 1,000 pounds a week of fatty lipids as she travels. By the way, this is pretty cool. Gray whales get about 16 miles to 1 gallon of fatty lipid. That's their travel weight loss, 16 to 1. So these mothers that are losing all this weight are capable of producing about 55 gallons of fatty milk per day to their calves. Now, the milk is 53% milk fat, and that's incredible when you think of human milk fat at 2%. So these animals are actually consuming cheese, and not the low-fat stuff, the good stuff, giving the gray whale calves a weight gain of about 2 pounds an hour, 48 pounds a day. So if you were to go down to the lagoons and say mid-March, you would see 18 to 19 foot gray whale calves, not 12 to 15 foot gray whale calves that were just born 4 or 5 weeks ago. They're growing incredibly fast. And this is important. This animal's got to endure a 4, 5, 6, 7,000 mile migration up to the feeding grounds in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Sea. So it needs to be gaining weight fast. It needs insulation. So gray whales have about 12 centimeters of collagen or blubber that insulates them. Of course, the calves aren't going to have that immediately, but they're going to have a fair amount as they start consuming that fatty milk. They're also going to be putting on the fatty lipids necessary to travel. They're also going to be building up muscle as they swim around with mom. If they're on the southbound migration, if they're in the lagoons, or even more special, which I love, and we have the best destination in the world for this. When the mothers and the calves come up the coastline heading back to the Bering Sea, Dana Point to North Laguna is like a playground. These mothers love to exercise in the shallow water. It not only allows the calves to get some exercise and play a little bit, but it teaches them to stay shallow in their navigation, which will protect them from their natural predator, the killer whale. But in doing so, in exercising in these shallow water areas and coves, the animal's going to build up more muscle. So these calves, as they wallow and play in our shallow water coves and fight that surgy condition in there, are going to build up muscle. When they build up more muscle, they build up more myoglobins, which is going to allow them to hold their breath longer. Mom can already hold her breath for over 20 minutes. This is crucial if she needs to avoid a predator. Killer whales can only hold their breath for about 4 to 5 minutes, and maybe even less if they're attacking. So gray whales' ability to elude their predators is their ability to hold their breath. But also inclement weather. When gray whale calves get north of Los Angeles, Point Conception area, they're going to start seeing a little bit different weather than the weather we see here in Southern California out on our ocean, which is mostly nice. They get up north, they might see 10, 12-foot swells and 20, 30 mile an hour winds. They're going to need to hold their breath at times to get through and make sure to get a good breath of air. It's just like us. Gray whales breathe air, not water. So this animal then will be migrating with its mother back up to the Bering Sea. Gray whales nurse for about 8 months, and then they'll wean, and then with their mother they'll learn how to feed on those nutrients in the Bering Sea, and then as the general population starts to evacuate, so will the mother and the calves. And as they start to evacuate, mom and calves start to separate. It's not a lifelong relationship. In fact, we have no evidence that they'll ever recognize each other again. So they get about a year with their mom to learn social behaviors, gain some weight, learn the route, and then they're on their own. And at about 7 years of age, they'll reach sexual maturity. and they'll have a calf about every 3 years, living to be close to 80 years of age. Now with gray whales, we do not recognize menopause, so these gray whales will calve about every 3 years their entire lives once they reach that sexual maturity age of about 7. So there's so much more to learn about these wonderful animals, their beautiful barnacles, the whale lice that's on their body, and our crew and captains here at Dana Wharf Whale Watching are amazing at explaining to you. Now we're going to be observing social distancing, running limited loads, but we're still going to celebrate this wonderful animal during the Festival of Whales. So please come down to Dana Point Harbor this year and enjoy this wonderful animal on its annual migration, and I hope to see you there. Have a great day, guys, and thanks for watching.